Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the study of the early Christian movement and its implications for the church today. Today we have Michael, our resident ephesiologist. I'm Andrew Johnson, a pastor at Neartown Church in Houston, Texas, and today we are joined by Dr. Todd M. Johnson. Dr. Johnson is the Eva B. and Paul E. Toms Distinguished Professor of Mission and Global Christianity. He's the co-director of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Dr. Johnson is a visiting research fellow at Boston University's Institute for Culture, Religion, and World Affairs, leading a research project on international religious demography. He also continues to gather data and produce works and edit many editions. He is the co-author of the World Christian Encyclopedia, both editions 2 and 3, as well as a series editor with Ken Ross on the 10-volume Edinburgh Companions to Global Christianity series. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks.
Okay, so Michael, how have you interacted with Dr. Johnson in your missiological work?
Yeah, well, we've never personally met, as near as I can recall, but certainly have been following the research that he has done over the years, the decades, really, and utilize that research in my own research as we think about things that are going on around the world, and have just enjoyed the immense amount of data that he's provided for many of us, not just in the academic world, but in the global religious world. And so it's been fun to be a follower of his in that sense, and just delighted that you had the time to join us today to talk about the most recent research that you all have been doing.
Dr. Johnson, before we start quizzing you on numbers and tables and figures, can you help add a little color? Who is Dr. Johnson outside of a researcher? What are some things your friends would actually know about you?
Yeah, sure. I really enjoy being outside, for one thing. I love to run. I love to bike. My wife and I hike quite a bit. I just came from Seattle overnight last night, and we spent quite a bit of time walking along the Pacific Ocean, and I live pretty close to the Atlantic Ocean here up in Boston. So that's been a sort of a favorite thing for me, just spending time outside. And I'm doing it while I'm studying climate change and other issues that affect Christians and, of course, humanity worldwide. So for me, something I treasure is the great outdoors. And I'm originally from Minnesota, so you kind of pick that up, living in the land of 10,000 lakes. So yeah,
that's great.
That's wonderful. Well, anytime anybody's on and they're mentioning Seattle, we were there this past summer, and I have a photo I took of Deception Pass, north of Seattle. And it's just, every time I look at it, it's just like, oh, I want to be outdoors. Wherever I am at that moment, I would prefer to be there. So Dr. Johnson, I share that affinity with you. Today, we wanted to have you on because your organization, the center there at Gordon Conwell, has recently conducted a Status of Global Christianity study. Came out this year, 2024, and you've set the context between observations from 1900 as well as, I don't want to say predictions, but where the forecast of where things are going to be in 2050. What led you all to want to bring this study together at this time?
Yes, well, actually, it's a continuation of a series of studies, and we're we're pretty excited because we're coming up next year in 2025 on 60 years of continuous research on world Christianity. And it was pioneered by an Anglican missionary in Kenya, of all places, who his name was David Barrett, and he was really the first person to study all of Christianity. He started in Kenya in the late 50s, and then in 1965 he founded a unit of research, and that's where we consider that the founding of our current work. And I did work with Barrett for many, many years. So, but he studied just Kenya, then he looked at East Africa, then West Africa, then all of Africa, and finally he was the one asked to update a little book called the World Christian Handbook, which had been going around since the 1940s, kind of a directory of Protestants mainly, but he studied all of Christianity over a 14-year period. He traveled to 212 of the 223 countries in the world in the 1960s and 70s, some of it on the back of a motorcycle. I mean, it's really quite a remarkable person. But his big achievement was to show back in 1982 that there were 22,000 Christian denominations in the world. And he did this, again, all from, a tiny little office in Africa. And they called his book, which the World Christian Encyclopedia, the first edition, they called A Miracle from Nairobi, because no one had ever managed to do it. But actually, my colleague Gina Zerlo, who is the co-author of our current edition, she studied Barrett and figured out that one of the reasons that he was able to do what he did was because he was in Africa, because sociologists in the Western world said religion's going to disappear by the year 2000. It's not a very important subject. Let's move on. Sort of, that was the general
attitude.
feeling. Yeah, but he stepped outside and he saw vibrant Christian movements and other religions, and he thought, this is the world that I'm studying, and he paid very close attention to it, and as a result, found out where Christians were and what was happening, and then we've continued that project, and every year we publish a update. And that's the one that you're referring to.
Okay.
Began actually right after the World Christian Encyclopedia. Then, church leaders and missiologists and other people said, it's nice that you did this once, but could you tell us how things are changing over time? And that led to this article and table that appears every year in the International Bulletin of Mission Research. And we try to highlight some interesting findings in the midst of that.
Great. Well, and you certainly do. I mean, one of the notable things, as you just mentioned, was early on that David Barrett identifying the numbers of denominations, and that seems to have proliferated from his time to our time. Your recent article notes that there are 47,000 denominations now.
Yeah, that's right. And it's sort of a good news, bad news.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is look at all the variety in Christianity around the world. And that's a strength of Christianity, that it it can grow in so many different pots, cultural and sociological and other. But the downside is that there's a lot of schism. In fact, that was the name of Barrett's doctoral thesis back in the 60s, was Schism and Renewal, because it's a little bit of both. Schism being, like when I was in Seoul, Korea a few years ago, and I was being driven up one of the major boulevards there, and I said, oh, what's that church on the side of the road? And he said, oh, that was founded in the 1940s, and it's still thriving. And I said, oh, that's great. And then we went a little further, and I said, what about that one on the right side? He said, Well, that church broke off of the 1947 church in 1972 and is now continuing on its work. And further down the boulevard, what about there? And he said, well, that one broke off of the 1972 church in
Wow.
1991, and because the pastor, didn't like the ideas and so on. And I go, wow, that's really something. And then we went a little further, and there was a church under construction. And I said, don't tell me that one broke off of the 1991 church. He said, actually, it did, last year.
Gosh.
And now they've built another, there's over 200 Presbyterian denominations in Korea now. So good, is the variety. The tough part is, sort of everybody having a slightly better idea of what should happen. And so we try to document it to the best of our ability. And
yeah, well, we appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Now, the subtitle to this article that is coming out in the Overseas Ministry Study Journal is Fragmentation and Unity.
Yeah, because so the question, even back in the 1980s when Barrett made this discovery, is trying to better understand why there are so many different groups. But the minute that you embark on that quest, you really face the issue of unity, and because many Christians are not happy about all of the different groups that are out there. And so what we highlight in the article, we highlight different groups around the world that are trying to address it. And and most groups don't address the whole thing because that's pretty tough. But most groups try, even within their own part of Christianity, to say, how are we going to get along better? And in evangelical circles, we have the sort of the two obvious groups of Lausanne, which was kind of a movement within evangelicals. Billy Graham brought, a couple thousand people together in Lausanne, Switzerland. So it got the name Lausanne. And it turns out that it's just about to celebrate 50 years, because it was 1974. We're going to be meeting in Seoul, Korea, in September this year to kind of reflect back on this 50 years of trying to bring evangelicals together. And then a year later, a different organization, but a complementary one to Lausanne, is the World Evangelical Alliance. And they might also be meeting in Seoul or in Asia probably a year later. And they're made up of national bodies. That's the main difference between the two, is the national bodies in the World Evangelical Alliance, and then the kind of the people from around the world that are part of evangelicalism getting together in Lausanne. So we try to highlight groups like that, and then groups that go wider, like the World Council of Churches, and then the group that is in many ways the widest of all, which is meeting in Ghana next month, actually, is the Global Christian Forum, which tries to bring together evangelicals, yes, and Pentecostals, but also Orthodox and Catholic and mainline Protestant and other groups, and they've all been quite successful, actually. It's a good thing that these organizations, these umbrella groups, exist, because they're a place where people can get together and compare notes, and so they're working on the unity side of it, and that's something we wanted to highlight this year.
Yeah, great. And not necessarily doctrinal unity, correct?
Well, not entirely, although, a lot of the groups that go out the widest often go back to Nicaea, the Nicene Creed. And there are actually things we can agree on doctrinally, even when we look at sort of the widest possible definitions of Christians. And those are, it's kind of nice to find a commonality that goes back historically, as you have that concern. And by the way, one of the deep ironies of the Nicene Creed and the situation that we find ourselves in now is that, of course, the main finding of our work over the last few decades is the shift of Christianity to the global South.
Hmm.
Back in 1900, 82% of all Christians were Europeans or North America, and now that's just 33%. So it's a big change, and of course on the other side, from 18% in the global South to 67%. But the interesting thing that most people don't know is that back in Nicaea, the majority of Christians and bishops and Christians who were at that meeting were actually Africans and Asians, not
Mhm.
Europeans. So we have a faith that is more global now, hearkening back to a faith that was actually more global than at first glance. And of course, Nicaea is in Asia Minor, not in Europe. So I think that's a nice little uh, piece of balance in global
Yeah.
Christianity that we're finding.
Absolutely. That was something that just jumped out to me from the study was the exponential rise of the church in the global South, both now, recently, and moving forward. For those who are unfamiliar with your work and the cataloging of who fits where, what are the countries or the region? When you say global South, who fits in that bucket?
Yes, one of our commitments as a research center, which has served us so well over the decades, is that we don't make up categories for where people live in the world. And what we do is we follow the United Nations, which has the broadest and most widely used set of categories, because there's many ways to
Right.
divide the world up. And so we follow their continental approach, and it's actually pretty simple when it comes to North and South. And that is that the global North is essentially North America and Europe going all the way to Siberia because it includes
Okay.
Russia.
Yep.
And then the global South is Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. Now there's global North presence in the global South, for example, Australia and New Zealand. But on the other hand, it's just a simple way to
Hmm.
divide up the world, and it works really well for this past century in Christianity because of this particular shift. And if we choose to use the United Nations taxonomy, which we do, and we don't make up our own population
Hmm.
figures. We're studying Christianity and religion in this global context, and because we follow this taxonomy, it's used by all sorts of groups around the world, including large secular NGOs and we have constant conversations because all of our statistics match all of theirs as far as
Hmm.
development work goes and other things. So, because within Christian circles, there's groups that want to use other terms like majority world and stuff like that, and that's all good, and certainly there's good reasons for it. But in our case, we're going to just stick with this widely used way of talking about the world.
Well, it's
Yeah.
helpful because it's consistent. And so there's much to be appreciated about that without having to redefine terms or, hey, I know you all have been used to reading this, but we're changing it this year because of, just standard is good. Standard is very good.
Yeah, and your data, of course, is very interesting. I'm looking at one of your tables on global religions, and we're not surprised, I guess, by the numbers that we're seeing in terms of the numbers of Christians being about 2.6 billion, Muslims a little bit more than 2 billion, Hindus 1.2-ish billion adherents. But this one sort of surprised me, I guess, is the number of religionists at 7.2 billion. Is that total?
Mhm.
That's the total number of the global population.
No, that's the total number of people who adhere to a religion.
Okay.
And,
Of
and
any sort.
yeah, of any sort, and that's important because it's probably one of the most counterintuitive of our work that we're doing. And remember, we're studying Christianity up here at the Center for the Study of Global
Right.
Christianity in Hamilton, up at Gordon Conwell. But I study religion in general down at Boston University, and well, we had to do that
Yeah.
because Barrett actually he accidentally invented religious demography, or at least he gave it a big push, because when he figured out that 60% of a country was Christian, then he said, well, I should also inform the reader on what the other 40% is. So all of a sudden, we're doing a comprehensive religious demographic profile, you see. And when I first came up here 20 years ago, I did a study on Sunnis and Shias, breakdown just like Catholic and Protestant, sort of in the Christian side of things.
Uh-huh.
And it was published in Europe with the source being World Christian Database. And I thought, well,
I bet that was really received well.
yeah, well, that's the problem. And I thought, well, I didn't really do anything Christian to find out how many Sunnis and Muslims. And I asked a friend, what should I do? And he said, call Peter Berger down at Boston University. Peter Berger is a famous sociologist. And Peter said, well, why don't you come and work with me on this? And we'll put this under a proper heading. And we started the World Religion Database, using the same tried and true techniques that we used for
Right.
Christianity. And we've done that ever since. But what I was going to say is that our most counterintuitive finding is that every single day, right now, the world becomes more religious, not less religious.
Mm.
And that's shown in the table you're referring to. And we think this is actually going to continue on through the year 2050.
Mhm.
And the reasoning behind this goes actually back to 1970, which was the point at which there were the most non-religionists because of Soviet communism. And the 20th century was a tough century for religion, bloodiest century in human history, and so on. But with the collapse of communism and with the growth of religion in places like India and China and other places, we actually are moving in the opposite direction. And that's counterintuitive to most Westerners who think we're on this disappearance.
Downward trend.
Yeah.
And that was early on Peter Berger's idea too, wasn't it? That we are increasingly becoming secular, but he changed his view later on because he identified, like what you're talking about, the world is becoming increasingly more religious, and particularly even the Western world. And the United States was an example that he would refer to, not necessarily as being an anomaly, but something that actually would debunk the secularization thesis.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, in one of the last books he wrote, basically set out sort of a new idea, which was instead of modernity creating secularity, modernity creates choice, and choice often leads people, to religion, and not to secularization. Although secularization is real for sure,
Right.
and we do experience it in many ways, but yeah.
Okay.
But the reality is that secularization, it certainly is true in a lot of pockets, but when you take it on a global scale and look at more of the trends everywhere, the amount of secularization is dwarfed by the amount of religionist growth. Is that accurate to say?
Yes. Yeah.
So then, I mean, obviously in the European and North American context, we're seeing a decline in terms of those who would identify as Christian. Globally, we're seeing an increase. Your data is suggesting that religion is not in decline, globally speaking. So how do we account for what we're seeing in the Western world in terms of a decline? People aren't becoming less less religious. But yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's driven by different factors, and they're different in different places. And of course, people who are leaving religious affiliation are real people, and it is a trend in of course for a long time in Europe and increasingly in North America. So that's happening, especially younger people. It's a little complicated because people who say they have no religion often pray every day, they read their Bible every day, they believe in God. One of the funny findings that came out of the Pew Forum about 10 years ago is that, if I can remember what percentage, an appreciable percentage of atheists believe that God exists, you see. So people don't like to fit very well in the categories. They're spiritual, but not religious, all of those
All
sort
of
of
that
things.
jazz.
Yeah, so that's all there. But then we have migration. And if you talk about, the decline of Christianity, that's a complicated thing because immigration is bringing in large numbers of Christians, especially from Latin America, in the United States, let's say, or in Canada for that matter. So one of the things is that Christianity is becoming more diverse, even as it shrinks as a part of the population. And many people think that the influx of new Christians from other countries around the world could level things off. It's certainly possible. But then the other factor is people of other religions coming into a country like the United States through immigration. And so in one sense, we're maybe less Christian, but more diverse. And we're more diverse as Christians. So it's sort of a complicated picture. And if younger Christians in the West are leaving Christianity because of its maybe over-identification with the West, in Western values and that sort of a thing, what happens when global Christianity enters into that conversation? Because I think a lot of younger Christians that I know who are upset about Christianity are actually more interested in engaging, global issues and in the value of diversity and that sort of a thing. So we'll see how this plays out, but it's certainly not a single trend. It's a set of different trends happening at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed a number of positive trends here that were surprising because it seemed to me, as I recall, earlier data was reflecting a negative trend, and in particular, the growth of the missionary force. You're suggesting that in mid-2024 that we have 445,000 missionaries in the world, and that's up from 425,000, and you're predicting 600,000 by the year 2050. What do you see contributing to that shift? Because am I correct that at one point it seemed to be a negative trend?
Yes. Well, there's two things happening at the same time. One would be that the actual decline within, let's say, well-established denominational, organizational missionary sending. If you look at the North American Protestant Mission Handbook, which has been published for decades, you can see a steady decline. But remember, there's all these independent churches coming out, new denominations. They don't get into the book, see, because they're not part of that. And one of the things because I speak in churches pretty frequently, over the last 30 years or so, I've always wandered to their missionary map, where they show where their missionaries are. And over the years, I could see that less and less of the people on that map were actually in these the traditional book that that
Mhm.
counts missionaries. And so we've tried our best to be true to these independent missionaries. And let's say many of them go into newer networks than the traditional ones. But actually, a lot of them do what's called direct sending, which is they just go from that church to the other side of the world, and they're doing the exact same thing as the more established agencies. And many have been there now for decades. I know a couple of missionaries from Louisiana who have been in Siberia for decades, just like other missionaries, but they're not on the radar of sort of the standard way of counting things. And of course, we've experienced that with trying to count Christians as well. Barrett, did this amazing work, 50 years ago, but at least he had, standard books that he could look at and then supplement those with some groups that weren't there. Now, most of the groups aren't in the books anymore, you see, so it makes it more difficult for us to keep track of everybody.
Mm.
My
Wow.
goodness. Something that jumped out to me as I was looking over the Christian mission table specifically was the very large number of 18.5% that there are not the percentage of non-Christians who know a Christian. 18.5%. So that means that over 80% of non-Christians do not know a Christian. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes. And this is a study we did back about maybe 15 or so years ago, in which we were trying to determine if there was a friendship gap, essentially, between non-Christians and Christians. And particularly in the Muslim world, the Hindu world, the Buddhist world. And we realized that we actually had some measurements that would show us the extent to which Christians were personally engaged with non-Christians. And then when we turned it around, we got the negative figure as well. And it just means that, and actually this relates to where we started out.
Right.
Because if most Christians 100 years ago were living in Europe and North America, then what about the rest of the world?
Right.
And in fact, what you get is a sort of a cultural gap and a friendship gap that goes with it. So, and then you get really, really difficult things like Islam in the West, where West sort of is equated with Christianity, because it was at one point, the majority of Christians were in the West. But Christian-Muslim relations, for example, suffers under the fact that there's not a lot of personal contact. But now, of course, so the bad news is we've sort of figured out that there's this gap, partly because Christianity was so isolated in the West that it it kind of sort of grew out of touch with everybody else over a long period of time, and now Christianity is more embedded around the world. So we think there's actually hope for addressing this personal gap, but it definitely is one of the great challenges of the 21st century.
Wow.
It just boggles my mind, right? Again, it boggles my mind that 81.5% of the world don't know a Christian.
Well, 81.5% of non-Christians, because the other there's 33% or 32 point something, about a third of the world is Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And then they know people, but they actually don't know a lot of people, especially those furthest from the gospel, furthest from centers of Christianity. And here, look, I mean, some of this is you can get your mind around it with geography, right?
Right.
But for example, we my wife teaches English as a second language, and one of the things we've enjoyed doing is having people over at Easter and Thanksgiving, and whenever we're celebrating something.
Hmm.
And we always go around the table, and often these people are studying at a university, or their husband or their wife, because they tend to be the spouses. They're studying at university somewhere in Boston. How long have you been here? 2 or 3 years. Have you ever been invited into an American home? No, this is the first time. Everyone, every time. So there's a gap there. I mean, right there, we invited these people into our home. That's part of the way my wife thinks. She grew up as an MK in Guatemala, and she just thinks differently than most Americans, I guess. And she gets letters from these students or emails, later saying, I just want you to know that was one of the high points of my time in the United States, was
Wow.
being in your home. Okay. So now Western people maybe are a little bit less hospitable, excuse me,
I would say
by culture.
hostility actually might
Yeah,
be
yeah,
be right. So
yeah. Okay, no. But anyway, uh, the good news again is that Christians of the global South tend to have that as more of a part of their ethos, and it's actually a Christian virtue.
Mhm.
So it isn't a bad thing that we're moving in that direction. And this is one of the things we need sort of the gifts of the global church to kind of get back reoriented to how people should be treated, in our homes and around the world. So I see this as pretty positive, actually.
Well, I love how you're using the quantitative data there to get to some qualitative action points for us. And it's so valuable what you've done over the years. Just so appreciative of that information and how we can think about and process what are the things that we need to be focusing on. So we're grateful for that.
In addition to all of this, is there like one other low-hanging fruit? So increased Christian hospitality. That seems, out of our conversation we just had, that would be an action step. Is there another one piece of low-hanging fruit that you would encourage our listeners to take action on that might lead to a greater impact for Christ globally?
Yeah, well, there's actually two, and I can
Okay.
summarize them quickly. One is kind of interesting in light of our research of trying to understand what's going on in Christianity around the world, and that is we have about 2,000 photos in this giant World Christian Encyclopedia, and we wanted to refresh those for the third edition. And so one of my students she was really great with photos and began to collect, but then her agency said, we want you to go to Athens and work with refugees in Greece.
Oh, yeah.
So she went to Athens and started that, but her agency was kind enough to me to allow her to spend 8 or 10 hours a week collecting photos from around the world for our encyclopedia. And we couldn't buy royalties and everything because we got way too many. So we were looking for royalty-free photos. And she collected and collected and collected. And then we went in and looked at these photos, and all we were doing was asking people, asking the question, what are Christians doing around the world? We want pictures to show what Christians are doing. Well, it turns out that almost all the photos that came back were women.
Huh.
And this is a contrast when you ask for photos of leaders of each of the movements, then which we also had. We kind of had a who's who in one of our publications, and those are almost all men. And so we thought, well, if women are doing all this work, are their voices being heard as Christians try to figure out, how to be more effective and that sort of a thing. So we made quite a strong case in the encyclopedia for listening to women and women exercising leadership. And then we followed it up after that with a project on women in world Christianity. And a new textbook has come out of my colleague Gina Zerlo published Women in World Christianity, which is the first ever textbook on the subject. So I think the role of women in the global church is so critical as we move forward, and especially their voice and their leadership. And despite the fact that there's different, churches have different ideas about what should be happening, but we really wanted to support that. And then related to that was the fact that many of these photographs were demonstration of the gospel through social programs and other ways of ministering to human need. And you might remember that one of the tensions, even back in 1974 in Lausanne, was proclamation and demonstration.
Yep.
And Rene Padilla, who actually just passed away this last year, he said, as a Latin American Christian, he saw proclamation and demonstration as two wings of a plane. Whereas you go further into the West, and there's a lot of confusion, even though evangelicals in past centuries were dedicated to
both wings.
Yeah, that's right. Abolition of slavery and stuff. So I mean, there's even a book called The Great Reversal about how evangelicals lost their way. But in the 1970s, we see an appeal for what he called integral mission, where you have this integrated view, and that's where the global church is now. That's where we're headed. And so that's the other area is let's work together in proclamation and demonstration around the world to preach the gospel, preach the good news. So that's the other.
Wonderful.
Yeah, a renewed call for healthy social justice alongside a clear call to repentance and knowledge of Jesus. It almost seems like that could actually shake the world. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much.
It did in the first century.
I would say it did. That I was being a little facetious, Michael. That is exactly where I'm going. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us, as well as for continuing to do this faithful research and getting it out in the world to call that global church back to Christ. And the mission he has called us to. So if people are listening right now, are excited by what they're hearing, how can they engage with you further in the work you were doing?
Yes, well, we do produce giant reference books, and so you could ask your library to get a hold of our atlases or encyclopedias or that sort of a thing. But we also try to put up some free material, and much of it is at globalchristianity.org. So it's easy for you to access. It says a little bit more about what we're doing. And we've tried to also publish, more accessible books to reach out beyond our highly technical audience. So that's, I guess a few years ago, I wrote a book with one of my students called Our Global Families. And that was an attempt with my student, Cindy Wu, to say, what does all this mean? It was my first chance, actually, to do that. And after writing many of these reference books, it was fun to be able to do that. And I remember the first day I heard one of my students say, hey, I'm reading your book. And I thought, well, I think it was my 12th or 13th book. And I thought, that's the first time I've ever heard anybody say that, because you don't read an encyclopedia or an atlas, So it's kind of fun. But mainly I'm going to continue with, providing the figures and statistics and so on.
Well, and I also will say, Michael held it up, I have it too. Portraits of Global Christianity was assembled almost in your honor, which I really appreciated. It was fun that you exist as a faithful follower of Christ, far beyond a data gatherer. And there are people who have been impacted by your research, your faithfulness, and your work. And they said, hey, along this line, we're gonna grab a snapshot of what's happening globally and do so in the vein of Todd Johnson. and it's wonderful. So we have this, so we would commend it to you, our listener, Portraits of Global Christianity. Gina Zerlo, as previously referenced, Dr. Zerlo is the editor of this. So if beyond the studies, if anybody wants to send you an email, do you do email? Do they get a hold of you that way?
Yeah, and they can email us at info@globalchristianity.org. That's probably the easiest way to get to us.
That is perfect. Well, Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for being on our podcast today. And we would also like to thank you, the listener, for spending your time with us too. If this was your first podcast with us on the Ephesiology Podcast, well, we would invite you to go check out some of the other podcasts that we have recorded. Pull up your podcast feed, scroll back, find a topic that interests you, and dig in. Certainly, we would also invite you to go to masterclasses.ephesiology.com. We have resources available there, as well as an opportunity for you to learn what might it look like for you to get a further education to pursue Christ in this world. So for Michael, Dr. Johnson, and myself, thanks for joining or doing Theology in Community with us today on the Ephesiology Podcast.